In this video, I'll be explaining how and why we use models in science. Examples of models used in science have a lot of variety, but here are a couple that I've chosen to show you. Sometimes models are used to explain things that are happening. Sometimes models are used to make predictions about what will happen, and sometimes models are used to explain something that already did happen. In science, models are used to represent what is happening that we cannot see, that causes what we can see. So much about science is beyond our scope, and so models are a tool to make sense of our world. In science class, we will use models for a variety of different purposes, but particularly we will use models to share our thinking, make sense of what we observe, and track changes in our thinking over time. Recently, I love to grow tomatoes, and I grew seedlings this year. And luckily, I was able to plant a lot of those seedlings, and they grew into these beautiful tomato plants. But some of my seedlings had a problem. The leaves of the tomato seedlings started to curl. They curled and they got dry and crunchy, and I just wasn't sure what happened. So at first they started off looking beautiful and green and fresh, and then it got this unfortunate leaf curl situation. I really didn't know what to do, but finally I decided to look online, and I found out that this can be caused by over-fertilizing my plant, and that the solution would be to take the plant out and rinse off the roots. So I decided to do that. Luckily for me and my tomatoes, this was great advice, and my tomatoes were able to grow into healthy, strong plants. So that means that luckily, everything turned out to be a happy ending for me and my tomato plants. And yet I recognized that it was really possible that I could make the same mistake again if I didn't understand what was happening. So I decided to sit down and make a model. And in my model, I drew out my plant at 3 different stages: before, during, and after. This is really common when we're making models. This allows us to think about how something is changing over time. When we think about how things change over time, it helps us to make sense of what might be going on. The next thing that I did is I listed out observations. So for example, before I had problems with the leaf curl, my leaves on the tomato seedlings were green, they were smooth and flat. However, when I noticed the problem, the leaves were curled and burnt and brittle. They seemed really dry, and clearly something was wrong with them. After I had rinsed out the roots and repotted my tomato plant, it turned out that the plant resumed very much the appearance that it had before the problem. So I wrote that the leaves were green and flat and relatively healthy looking. The next thing that I decided to do was what we call a zoom in. A zoom in is where you imagine that you can get down on a microscopic level and see what is happening that normally we would not be able to see. So in my zoom in, I am imagining what I would see inside of the leaves if I could get down to that microscopic level. So I know that leaves are made up of these little tiny boxes. I've seen pictures before. And so when I drew my zoom in on the healthy plant, I drew those boxes to be relatively large. Then, however, I started thinking maybe that means that those little boxes are shrinking down for some reason. I don't know why, but I'm thinking maybe they're shrinking down, and that is why the leaves themselves look curled. So that would mean on a bigger plant that those little boxes would be larger again. I continued to make updates to my model, and then I realized that I wanted to do a zoom in of what was happening into the roots. I had remembered hearing something about over fertilizing. So then it got me wondering, what about the fertilizer exactly would be causing that problem? And so I decided to zoom in on the fertilizer itself, and I imagined that it's made up of a bunch of tiny little particles that I can't see. And so I'm showing that fertilizer going up and into the plant and somehow getting into those little boxes. And because doing models really does help us with our sense making, so too did making this model for me. It got me then wondering about what else I need to know in order to answer this. So I wrote out some questions. What is fertilizer and how is it changing those little boxes? And is too much of a good thing a bad thing? How would that be happening? Does it have something to do with somehow blocking what is supposed to come in or preventing what's supposed to go out from leaving? I don't know the answer to all of these questions yet, but it has given me a direction that I want to go in order to answer these questions. And that is what science is. So as we make our first model in the next couple of days, I want you to be keeping a few things in mind. First of all, when you're making models, there is no one right way to make a model. Models are a tool, and even in science, scientists have all sorts of different models. The models are meant to change as we collect evidence to update our thinking. And models are never perfect, so don't worry. This is an opportunity for you to just engage in thinking and explore your world.